Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here. I'll try and sound as intelligent as I can, mindful of the fact that everyone looks at me like as if I'm the only lawyer in the house. I think there are two or three others here as well. Anyway, it's good that we recognize that there are issues and that there are problems. And if I can take everyone back a little bit into history, there was a turning point which a lot of us seem to miss, and that was in 2002, when the then Prime Minister, in an apparent response to the late Dr. Fazil Noor of PAS, felt that he was compelled to demonstrate his credentials, Islamic credentials, by saying that Malaysia is an Islamic state. Sorry, Malaysia is an Islamic country, and without actually qualifying himself properly. Now, it is one thing for a normal politician or a religious scholar to make such proclamations, but it is another if the sitting Prime Minister of the country, against what the Constitution, against what the established legal principles are, makes a pronunciation of that sort. And what ensued after that was that none of the other component parties in his coalition actually saw fit to ask him, hang on, what do you mean by that? Can you qualify yourself? Oh, this is not our stand. They just took it as, well, let him say, because he's the Prime Minister, and we shall stay guided by it. Now, that allowed for an entire new set of thinking to flourish. Because it's out there, no one questioned it. It sort of like threw PAS out for a bit, because PAS's entire reason of being was to try and make Malaysia an Islamic country. And when the sitting Prime Minister says, well, we are an Islamic country, what are you complaining about? It took them a little bit by surprise, I am sure. They had to go back to the drawing board to see what now? What should we do now? But be that as it may, it allowed for a lot of other politicians, a lot of organizations, and a lot of other entities to feel that, well, if the Prime Minister says this is an Islamic country, I should be so guided accordingly. What we see today, some 13 years later, is a culmination of that process. It's as simple as that. You go back into history, no one corrected the then Prime Minister. He may have tried to explain himself a little bit along the line, but he didn't have the force of that statement he had when he first made that statement, I think in September 2002. Now, fast forward 2015, what we see today is really a response to what had occurred then. The problem with Islam is that, and I want to be very clear, it is an excellent religion. It is a beautiful religion. It's just that the people who are in charge of administering religion are the problem. And I say this because, I say this in the context that I am not Muslim, and I don't belong to any of the Abramovic religions. And I try to sound as logical and commonsensical as possible. I believe in God, but I really would like to find God myself rather than God finding me or people telling me this is what God is and this is what God should be. Now, the inability of the two largest Muslim-based parties, UMNO and PAS, to reinvent themselves in the last 2 decades has caused this problem. It is difficult to reinvent themselves when you're so used to a particular way of doing things, and when you're forced by external factors to reinvent, and you don't want to reinvent, the safest thing to do is to seek refuge in religion, because that helps. I cannot reinvent. I don't want to reinvent. It's going to take too much of my time. It's going to take too much effort. Let me use religion to stop the need for me to reinvent myself. And unfortunately, that has caused Islam, as we know it today, to have such a negative perception. And rightly or wrongly, a lot of us feel that we are paying the price for that. The issue facing Malaysia really now is, what is the definition of official Islam? And to what extent should the state and state-sanctioned actors have a role in determining what is official Islam? And Professor Keeney and and even Dr. Musa also talked about how decisions are masked in the name of religion. And most of us will not have a choice. If you're non-Muslim, the argument is very simple. Listen, you have not read the Quran, or you don't know enough about Islam, so therefore you are precluded from commenting. If you're Muslim, I think the arguments are a little bit more layered. It depends which school you're from, depends where you're from. And the easiest way is to look at you, oh, you know, your parents are liberal. You grew up in a liberal environment, and therefore you're not qualified to make any statements or to say anything about it. Now, let's not engage arguments like that, and let's try and move forward so that we can, you know, we all owe it to ourselves to make Malaysia a better place. At the end of the day, it's all about control. And control comes in two forms: security and economy. There's one aspect of having an official Islam which a lot of us don't see it yet, and I'll try and touch it as I go along, but I want to focus first on security. And when I talk about security, it is to ensure that there's one position on Islam that is taken consistently throughout the country. And with that, this is where all your laws come in. You know, Maria and Dr. Musa talked about the Sedition Act. Aside from the Sedition Act, Section 3, you also have other legislation which you should be mindful of, like the Communications and Multimedia Act, Section 233. If you write an article, or if you use email, Facebook, or Twitter to espouse your views, you could run foul if it's deemed to be an improper use of network facilities, or if it's Section 211, prohibition of providing offensive content. To some, it is offensive content. And also the Penal Code, Section 298 and Section 298A, which includes uttering words, whether it's in written form or verbal, and they were disseminated with the intention to offend the religious sensitivities of people. Again, you would ask, why is it so easy for people to get offended? That is because the official position has always been, the test really is not what the reasonable man thinks. The test in Malaysia, as I see it, is really what the hypersensitive man sees it. So it's very easy to be it's very easy to be offended. And religious sensitivities, unfortunately, is in a situation where one is unable to engage or rationalize with you. I'm offended. I'm offended by what you have just said, and therefore you have upset me, and you are now, for want of a better situation, yes, to kill you. Now, bringing all of that, and Dr. Farooq, you mentioned the federal constitution, and I think if I heard you correctly, you talked about the Sedition Act and how Article 10 really suggests that the Sedition Act, or at least the federal constitution, says that the Sedition Act is an illegal act of some sort. But unfortunately, the position taken by the Malaysian government is that if you look at Article 162, right at the back, any laws which came before the passing of the constitution, unless repealed, will still have force. That is the argument advanced by the state or the Attorney General's chambers when one argues over the constitutionality of the Sedition Act. Yes, the Sedition Act was passed in 1948. It was passed, India had the same laws, Burma had the same laws, Singapore had the same laws, and all the other Commonwealth countries. I think even the Caribbean also had its own version of the sedition laws. It was passed for a specific purpose. But it was also drafted in an extremely broad manner so that it would just capture anyone or anything that is deemed seditious. But unfortunately, so long as Article 162 is present in the Federal Constitution, the Sedition Act will stay. The only way out is to lobby enough change so that the Sedition Act can be repealed in its entirety. And Article 10.4 of the Federal Constitution allows for the broad powers given under Article 10, that is the freedom of expression, freedom of speech provision, to be trumped over by laws which Parliament passes. And that would include your Communications and Multimedia Act, that would include your Penal Code, and that would also include amendments to the Sedition Act, which came after Merdeka. So, recognizing that there is a problem is always a good step and the way forward. Now, the trick is, how do we find a solution? And at the heart of it really is that of control. We don't want too many people to be in charge. We just want one party or one organization to be in charge. I'm sure if there are reporters out here, if you did a little bit, you did a little bit more investigation, you would find that maybe since 2002, religious organizations, state religious organizations, would have seen an increase in their yearly budgets. Now, this is important because it allows them to hire more people. And when you hire a lot more people to sit in your office, they need to justify their existence. When you need to justify your existence, you would then, sit down and figure out, what else can I do to justify my existence? And this would include more investigations, ratings, you would find things that you read in the papers. Now, whether that's the right thing or wrong thing, that's for another day. And it's not my place here to pass judgments. But the question is that the direction that we want the country to take? And when you have a large enough organization trying to tell its citizenry, look, this is how you are going to lead your life, there's bound to be conflict. Since Merdeka, we have been managed by a civil system. You have a civil court. And even speaking of civil courts, I found it quite troubling when an ex-Chief Justice in an interview remarked, when he was Chief Justice, or when he was sitting in the federal court, he had to consider the evidence of two individuals, an Indian man, an Indian gentleman, and a Muslim gentleman. And he said he readily found the Muslim gentleman to be more trustworthy, simply because he was Muslim. I mean, it wasn't entirely shocking to me, but I found that how am I going to have confidence, even in my own civil system, when judges are predisposed to thinking that way? I thought you looked at the law and you looked at the facts, and you didn't impose morality, and you didn't impose your religious beliefs on the facts. You judged it purely from a secular point of view, and you made your decision. And speaking of secularism, I think there's also a need to correct the perception and definition of what secularism means. In the Western context, it actually means separation of religion and state, church and state, and so on. But in an Asian context, it actually means the coming together of all religion, and all religion are equal. There's a fundamental difference in those two things. If we are going to say that Malaysia is a secular nation, and our laws should reflect that secularity, then we must understand that it may not always mean that there's going to be a separation of religion and state, but a coming together of all religions. And as the federal constitution as it currently stands, Islam is first among equals. And we have to accept that. And if you're going to try and change that, this is where it's going to lead to a lot more problems. It's really the majority rules. Now, what we need to do, laws aside, is to strengthen and to make the state actors, organizations, institutions more accountable. Right now, they are not accountable. There's a lot of deficiencies in the Sharia courts which require some form of intervention to make it fair. And the argument that non-Muslims cannot have a say in how this process works is also wrong. In a multicultural society, multi-religious society like Malaysia, there is a need for everyone to have a say. Simply because I cannot stand by the wayside and watch another fellow citizen, just because he doesn't share the same religion as me, be subject to different rules. PAS may have its own reasons for trying to pass hudud, and I actually think it's because they need to really tell the people of Kelantan that, look, I'm still relevant rather than anything else. Whether the private members' bill actually gets tabled and heard and debated in Parliament, that's a separate thing. I actually hope it does not, for the simple reason that you would find that there would be different views taken from both the dominant Muslim parties. And there would be a break in ranks without a doubt. Now this brings me nicely to the other point of economy which I've mentioned. At the end of the day, I've always believed that religion has got one hidden motivation, that is money. We can always say that, well, that's not true, it's always about God. Fine. God always, the belief in God is one thing, that's between you and God. But at the end of the day, it's always been about money. Now, by having a standard understanding of religion, by having a standard process where it's really top down, I tell you, you listen, it then breeds and allows for the flourishing of a different understanding of the economy. So you will start having an economy where I will tell you what you can buy, I will tell you what you can eat, I will tell you where you can go, and I'll tell you how you should spend your money. And mind you, this applies to both Christianity as well as Islam. If you've been to a church, you would know certain Christian denominations require you to donate at least a portion of your income for the benefit of the church. And funny enough, yesterday someone had forwarded an article where in the I can't understand whether it was in the US or another country where the pastor had asked his congregation to help him buy a jet because he felt that the current one he had wasn't enough. And there were members of his congregation who felt that, well, he needs to travel, not in style, but safety aspects was very important, similar to some of the arguments advanced in this country. I shall not say anything more. So the takeaways that I'm trying to give is that as much as we recognize that there is a problem, we owe it to ourselves to try and find a solution to the problem. Perhaps one way to start is to lobby for a constitutional court. And we come to an understanding, to a landing, that the constitutional court, what is the composition of the constitutional court to deal with the federal constitution? If we accept the premise that the federal constitution trumps over everything else, then we owe it to ourselves to push for a constitutional court. That will go in no small way to cement the fact that the constitution is supreme in Malaysia and will continue to always be supreme. And I'll stop here, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you.